Hello and welcome back to another Monster Monday, a series where I draw a creature from D&D and I talk about its lore and its mythology and what it's like to fight in-game as well. In these videos, I like to use your suggestions for creatures that you'd like to see or hear the mythology of or just see my illustration interpretation of. And today's is absolutely no different. Today's topic was actually suggested by Liam Kirkwood, and they would like to see Asmodeus, the ruler of the nine hells. So if, like Liam, you'd like to see your monster suggestion up here as a topic that I cover, make sure to leave that down below in the comments section. And otherwise, let's get started with today's video. Players can be forgiven for believing that Asmodeus is an archdevil, because he does in fact hold that title. But in D&D, Asmodeus is actually known to be the supreme lord and ruler of all the nine hells. He is the god of evil deeds, of selfishness and indulgence, the patron of power, domination, tyranny, dictatorship, dogma, and oppression. He rules the lowest and most bleak pit of the nine hells, known as Nessus. Nessus is a seemingly endless expanse of desert-like platforms, filled with ravines and caverns so deep that they make the Mariana Trench look like a pothole. But these treacherous canyons are perhaps the only safe haven from the scorching heat and grating sandstorms that rage across the featureless expanse of the lowest plane of hell. The deepest pit in this unforgiving landscape, known as the Serpent's Coil, is said to be the personal lair of Asmodeus, from which he observes all the cruelties of the other 8 hells and commands his archdevil servants. Asmodeus is traditionally represented in D&D's art by his avatar, a crimson-skinned, horned humanoid, standing some 13 feet tall. This most vague of descriptions may be further illuminated by imagining that he generally tends to look like a cartoon or Halloween costume devil come to life, if the person wearing the suit had been in a street fight or a bar brawl beforehand. While he's said to be incredibly charismatic and enchantingly beautiful to look at, his body, which is usually covered in a robe, which is said to be so beautiful and so extraordinarily expensive that even a single ornament plucked from its hem could feed an entire nation for a year, is actually covered in gaping wounds, which never close and constantly ooze his poisonous tar-like blood. These wounds, and the Serpent's Coil trench itself, were said to be caused when Asmodeus, who is believed to have at one time been a benevolent god of some kind, was cast out of heaven. His fall through the nine hells tore his body to ribbons, with wounds that would never truly seal, dividing his power and weakening his near limitless might. His true form, however, is said to be reminiscent of a serpent which spans hundreds of miles in length, hence why his home is known as the Serpent's Coil, and why his impact site on the plane of Nessus resembles an impossibly long canyon. Perhaps because of the implication that Asmodeus was once good, or that he is weakened, or simply because he is particularly private and secretive as a creature, none may learn of Asmodeus' true form. Any who see his true body, or hear of his natural form, are unknowingly marked, and will die a horrific death within the next 24 hours. So, sorry guys, I've doomed us worse than a chain email. In an article in Dragon Magazine number 28, called The Politics of Hell, written by Alexander von Thorn and published in 1979, there are at least rumours that Asmodeus was not always the ruler of the hells, and that he in fact deposed Lucifer or Satan as the master of hell. But this history is somewhat convoluted, either through retconning in the real world, or because Asmodeus simply wanted to rewrite the history books. Any records of devils prior to Asmodeus have been eliminated, and the current belief is that Asmodeus is the first devil to exist, and has always been the undisputed ruler of the hells. This may be because Asmodeus' choice is to appear unapproachable, because if he unseated someone to become the ruler of the hells, then someone could very well try and challenge him for the throne. I'm looking at you, Lil Nas X. This article, however, is not considered canonical by Wizards of the Coast, so it's really up to you, your DM, and Asmodeus himself, what the truth of his origins may be. In terms of his origins in the real world, his first appearance in D&D was a reference and some artwork in first edition's release in 1977, although he has very infrequently had any tangible stat blocks in any editions, purely due to the sheer impossibility of actually managing to make a set of stats describing such a potent and devastating creature. The implications of defeating Asmodeus are pretty insane. If he represents all the evil in existence, then does defeating pure evil create a power vacuum, or is that the end of all evil deeds? The devils and demons have raged for an eternity in a never-ending stalemate of power between the devil's lawful evil ideology and the chaotic evil rampage of demonkind. Would Asmodeus' death end this blood war between the two and cause the chaos of demonkind to spill out onto all other planes, wiping out all life? Or would this begin some Judeo-Christian style end times event where the forces of heavens need to stem the tide of a demonic rampage? Who truly knows? But what about Asmodeus' origins in the real world, in actual legends and mythology? It's well known that D&D takes a lot of inspiration from the myths and legends of various cultures, religions, and folklore from across the world, and Asmodeus is absolutely no exception. While it's fairly clear that Asmodeus is an allegory in D&D for the Judeo-Christian devil, a single, solely responsible force of pure evil, Asmodeus itself has represented many things throughout human history. In ancient Judeo-Islamic lore, Asmodeus refers to the king of the Shedim, or Jinn, a cluster of earth spirits who would be depicted as villains or antagonists in the late 3rd or early 2nd century BCE in the Deuterocanonical book of Tobit, a Jewish text which documents God tempting various people to test their faith. Later on, in 1589, Asmodeus and these earth spirits would be explicitly redefined and categorized as devils or demons in the German bishop Peter Binsfeld's Treatise on Confessions by Evildoers and Witches. Specifically, Binsfeld named the following creatures as specific demons with mastery over certain deadly sins, including Lucifer, who is the personification and master of pride; Mammon was the master of greed; Leviathan embodied envy; Beelzebub was gluttony; Satan was the embodiment of wrath; Belphegor was the god of sloth; and Asmodeus embodied the sin of lust, due to his role in the Tobit. In the Book of Tobit, he meets a character known as Sarah, who he pretty much immediately falls in love with, and intends to kill anyone that she chooses to marry. So his lusting after this Sarah woman causes him to become the embodiment of all lust. Now, some of you will have been feverishly typing away the first time that I said Asmodeus, because there is actually a massive disparity in the D&D community about whether or not Asmodeus is pronounced Asmodeus or Asmodeus. I prefer Asmodeus, but ultimately it comes down to your preference, really, doesn't it? There's no right or wrong in D&D. That's pretty much the nature of the game. But the name Asmodeus is an ancient Greek approximation of the Avestan word Asmodai. The Avestan language, also sometimes known as Zend, refers to the language used in ancient Zoroastrian texts, originating in the 1st millennia BCE, and has its roots in ancient Iran. The word Asmodai is a fusion of the Avestan word Asma, meaning wrathful, and the word Deva, meaning god, spirit, or demon. So I like to pronounce the Asmo and Deus with independent stress to signify these two parts of the word, as the ancient Greeks would likely have said it, pronouncing both the wrath and god parts in the name. But that's just my choice, mostly because it makes Asmodeus seem like a wrathful god. But is Asmodeus actually wrathful? Asmodeus' place at the throne of all the 9 hells in D&D is actually pretty well deserved. He is actually near limitless in power. I tried to read through a list of all the powers and abilities that he's demonstrated in D&D sourcebooks, novels, and general legends and lore, and frankly it's actually easier to say that he's indestructible and has no cap on his power that he can demonstrate at will. But the fascinating thing about Asmodeus, and indeed, in my opinion, the fascinating thing about all creatures who are ludicrously, impossibly, unapproachably powerful, are their personalities, if writers indeed see fit to embellish them. Asmodeus has a deliciously charismatic personality that, despite their game-breaking power, will make all DMs desperate to have a go at playing him. He is confidence, charm, and elegance manifest into one awe-inspiring being. It is said that his conversational skills alone are so spellbinding that it's incredibly easy to forget that he is a nearly all-powerful god of pure evil, and has very likely personally orchestrated every single horrible thing that has ever happened to you, delighting in your suffering up until the moment that you've had a chance to speak to him. His beauty is said to be so intoxicating that all but the most faithful paladins will fall to their knees in worship of him, and his voice is said to pour into your ears like the finest melody, his scent so fragrant as to render all flowers dull by comparison. He is so self-obsessed, opulent, avaricious, and megalomaniacal that he would make Donald Trump look like a Buddhist monk, and yet he is so confident and so effortlessly graceful in his actions that it is utterly believable that he may be the strongest and most worthy being in existence to rule all of reality, for that is his aim. And those who merely witness him find it almost impossible to disagree that reality would be better off with him at the helm, despite the obvious signs that that's a really terrible idea. To this end, many either choose to or have become bound to worship the king of the nine hells. Worshippers of Asmodeus adorn their clothes and ritual halls with his symbol, that of 3 inverted triangles arranged in a long, downward-facing spear. Asmodeus doesn't necessarily desire or even need the power that most gods do. Their reliance on faith and worship sustains them, but for Asmodeus, not so much. He enjoys people singing his praises and massaging his insatiable ego, but they do not cause him to grow or diminish in power. Every act of evil strengthens him, and as such, he will never be weakened and cannot be slain. Instead, he tends to encourage smaller sects and cults to band together purely to undermine faith in other deities. He enjoys spreading lies, deceit, and corruption in communities, especially those devoted to the gods, because of their reliance on faith as their lifeblood. He likes to induce panic in the other gods in order to cause them to show their true colours, in the desperation for followers and for them to grow capricious and impulsive in view of their approaching death rattle. Asmodeus's followers often know that they are his pawns, and may either delight in being so, or follow his doctrines resentfully. He is the deity of devilish pacts. All pacts that any devil makes, they're all backed up by his power, and he receives the lion's share of any souls that find their way into the nine hells through these pacts. He's quick to offer power and influence to those who seek a solution to any non-permanent problem, which makes him a favourite among leaders and politicians. He is the deity of lawful evil, after all, and therefore hierarchies, structures, and dogma are his plaything to rearrange as he sees fit. Ultimately, the price for any of these bargains is almost certainly your eternal damnation, as either his eternal servant, to be tortured and corrupted into a devil in Asmodeus' service, or you may be ground down into little more than a balm for his eternal wounds. Asmodeus was definitely one of the hardest creatures I've ever had to conceptualize. I've mentioned before that I both enjoy and struggle to grapple with what it is to visualize a god, a personification of something. It's so hard and also so exciting to come up with something that embodies some natural force, some abstract concept, while still being human enough to be perceived of as something utterly not mortal. For Asmodeus, it is pure evil, and not in the they're a bad person sense, like drawing Strahd or some elder creature from another galaxy. They are evil. He's not even a huge ambient coalescence of evil. He is evil incarnate, evil with a capital E, the same way that the Grim Reaper is death with a capital D. How do you represent every evil deed, every evil thought, every selfish, greedy, hateful act, from the smallest grain of materialistic avarice to the most blatant and faith in humanity destroying act of breathtaking genocide? I wanted to try and capture the disappointment, that yawning bottomless feeling that carves a hole out of you, like you've just swallowed a cold lead weight, that sickening sensation that you feel when you read an article that talks about things like the COVID death toll, when you learn about the atrocities of dictators, when you read about a police officer's brutality and their actions against the BLM protesters. The cold feeling that you get every time there's another school shooting and no one seems to do anything about it. That bleak, empty feeling of dread that keeps you up at night knowing that someone chose to perform those deeds. I didn't want Asmodeus to be cool, not like the other monsters that I draw. I wanted him to be disgusting on an instinctive level, the antithesis of what it is to be good, but at the same time wearing the skin and shape of a human. That looking at him taking that shape should feel like an outrage, that he's taken something that belongs to you and is bastardizing it, mocking you by wearing your shape. I'm honestly not sure that I managed that. It was nearly impossible. But at least by telling you my intentions, you can see what I was trying to go for. There are very few sources to draw inspiration from in terms of real-world mythological interpretations of Asmodeus. One of the few images that I could find that depicts Asmodeus in the flesh, so to speak, comes from something known as the Dictionnaire Infernal, a book discussing demonology published by the well-known author and occultist Jacques-Colin de Plancy in 1818. Here, French artist Louis Le Breton created a horrific image of a beast with 4 heads, one human with a crown and long elf-like ears, one head which resembles a horned bull, another of a ram, and they have a humanoid torso which sprouts from a draconic body, almost like a draconic centaur, with the dragon's head protruding from the front of this section. The humanoid torso houses a set of bat-like wings behind it, and is nestled among many tails or tentacles. The draconic body seems to have multiple legs of different beasts, including the hooves of goats, lion-like paws, and at least one duck foot, so there was plenty to work with. And I chose to interpret that as something that I can fuse and mesh together, so all throughout his armour or skin, I chose to put numerous faces of various beasts and people all contorted in agony, a draconic-like face on the chest, and so on, all obscured in darkness, somehow unifying all species under the hatred of this one creature. But at the same time, I also wanted to include these red robes. Red is specifically his colour. Red and black are the colours of his worshippers. So I wanted to have this red robe oozing out like tar from this oil-covered body, with one beautiful face standing atop it. To look at him from a distance, he would almost seem like a beautiful human, but to examine him closely to see the true evils that underlie this humanoid frame, you would see that he is torture. Hello there, sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank all of my patrons over on Patreon for their support this month. Every single one of you, from those who are tipping me the price of a cup of coffee every month, all the way up to those at the very, very highest parts, the highest level backers on Patreon, really tangibly help me to live my dreams and make this content for you. In particular though, I wanted to thank my Silver Archfey patrons and above, who this month are Raptor Dio, Duck Quack, Napin Camo, Jonathan Foster, Yorick Beese, Benjamin Colburn, Dalton Namier, Ethan Dibby, Skyrush Soul, Nathan Stratton, Amanda and Jake Westfall, Ken Doman, Peter Balfe, Ryan H., Tim Kleemer, Steve Harrison, Dan Waterman, Styrax, Colby Monroe, It's Just Avi, or Avi, Brandon Kerr, Sam Hickson, Bork Boulderbender, Darth Caetana, Trevor Traub, Max Schluter, Max Copeland, Tamerling, AJ, Oliver Thorvald Mellock, Dominique Jolly, Aldrin, and Christian Palmer Smith. Thanks to all of these wonderful people, I get to make the videos that you're watching right now, so thank you for taking the time to help me thank them. And if you're interested in joining the community that we have over on Patreon, I'll make sure to leave a link down in my description box that you can use to find us there, where, as well as my immense gratitude for your support, patrons receive things like a shout out on all my live streams, this shout out right here, private videos about my homebrew world and lore, and the adventures that I've had in my campaigns that are exclusive to them, copies of every single illustration that I do each month. Every single patron is entered into a raffle each month with the chance to earn a commission of one of their characters, and some of us even have one-on-one chats every single month where we can talk about anything, or I can do some illustration work for you if you're interested in things like commissions. But anyway, I've taken up more than enough of your time. Thank you so much for your patience and for helping me thank these guys, and I'll let you get back to the video. As with all of my videos, I like to cover what these creatures are like to fight in combat, but when it comes to Asmodeus, that's almost impossible to answer. There are thousands of homebrew versions of this character, any of which would seem like a somewhat fitting version of Asmodeus if you wanted to use them in combat, so they're just a Google away. And we've seen demon lords and even gods like Tiamat get stat blocks in 5e, so we know that a god or goddess of one kind or another can have stats and can have their avatar destroyed. There are even mythic monsters added to add a deified element to monsters thanks to the mythic odysseys of Theros that essentially grant creatures multiple health pools to draw upon and multiple stages to their conflict. But to truly fit the lore of this character and to try and approach Asmodeus' level of sheer power in combat is frankly absurd. I don't mean that in the OMG this guy is so strong sense, but I just mean that defeating literal evil, if it's anything even close to his lore, stops making sense. As but a simple example, we're told that every single drop of Asmodeus' blood is so full of the stuff of evil, so damned, so pure evil, that any single drop that touches the ground will spawn a greater devil, like a pit fiend. These creatures are absolutely devoted to and bound to Asmodeus' will, so if we were to put that in game, for example, we'd have to say that every point of damage that Asmodeus takes causes a full health, challenge rating 20 devil to appear on the table under his command. And even if we're being generous and saying that HP doesn't equal blood drops, that feature still is written into Asmodeus' canon lore, so at some point we'd have to say that after 5, 10, 50 HP, after not too sizable a chunk of damage, this creature starts to spawn creatures that could kill a max level party on the regular. And that's just a passive feature, that's not something that he concentrates on or makes an ability check for or anything like that. If we even added that alone to the stat sheet of another lesser deity like Tiamat, who, as I mentioned in her Monster Monday video, is very likely to be one of the most, or close enough to one of the most powerful creatures Wizards of the Coast has ever given official stats for, he becomes absolutely terrifying. And when you bear in mind that Tiamat is utterly subservient to and has no hope of defeating Asmodeus, she works for this guy as basically a guardian of the Nine Hells, observing a gate to its entrance and exit, it basically becomes really close to impossible to put this creature in game and do it justice. One thing we do know about Asmodeus' combat prowess, or at least his combat style, is that he carries a very specific weapon or tool known as the Ruby Rod of Asmodeus, no doubt a not so subtle nod to his origins as a demon representing lust in Judeo-Christian folklore. Asmodeus is capable of creating 10 avatars simultaneously. So that's 10 beings at least as powerful, if not more strong, than Tiamat herself, one for each of the 9 hells, and one to do his bidding elsewhere, all of which he can act through simultaneously, and every single one of those has an identical Ruby Rod of Asmodeus. We're told that in combat, this staff, this rod, acts as a bludgeoning weapon, which is a +6 weapon, although in various versions of D&D, it has acted like a +2 Great Club or a +1 Morningstar. It allows him to choose which element he wants to use to damage someone. Like a dragon, it can cause people to experience fear, but they tend to cower in place rather than flee. He can cast healing and protection spells from it, and that obtaining one of these staffs and selling it to anyone who is foolish enough to try and buy one of these, at least from the material components alone, would be worth at least 1 million gold. The least that one of these has been sold for is 50,000 gold, because it was apparently condensed together from what is known as a shard of pure evil. And it's likely to be one of the many reasons that the blood war between devils and demons actually started. This shard of evil is, as it sounds, a mote of pure, solid evil energy. And it's believed that Asmodeus stole one of these shards from the Abyss, where demons dwell, which has made the Abyss incomplete, and that's one of the many reasons why demons hate devils to this day. This rod is said to be 4 foot long, although it can change shape, and I've chosen to embody it as a staff made of pure hateful energy, as we are told that these rods give off a constant, soft, and yet hateful red light. We're said that in terms of ranged abilities, it's capable of casting beams of almost any kind of energy that Asmodeus chooses, and that this energy would shoot off in every single direction, destroying everything except Asmodeus. It can also shoot a 150-foot beam of electricity, a beam of acid, or a 75-foot cone of intense cold. It can force people to bow down to Asmodeus, in an ability that's very similar to Hold Person, but on a mass scale. It can create walls of force in a 50-foot diameter. It can cast an anti-magic field, and can return damaged body parts, missing limbs, and lost health through diseases or poisons back to their owner, as well as being able to grant the wielders physical health and magical energy as if they had taken a long rest when it decides. We're told that, additionally, this healing effect can occur as a reaction, subconsciously, to harm whenever afflicted by an enchantment. So there's a chance that you could cast a spell on Asmodeus, get past his legendary resistance that he no doubt has, actually cause him some kind of damage, and that as an instinctive reaction to harm, he would be healed to full health and have all of his spells returned to him. But finally, we're also told that any of the abilities used by this staff could be used as often as wanted by Asmodeus, but only once per day by other people. and that if he particularly enjoyed a spell that somebody else was casting, he could strip someone of the ability to cast it, adding it to the abilities that the rod can use. So just the rod alone is one of the most deadly things that you're ever going to encounter in D&D, and that's just a trinket that Asmodeus can use. But anyway, despite the impossible evil of this creature, I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you're a DM, I hope you're not planning to throw this creature at any of your players, because I can't imagine much more terrifying things to come out of the game. But until next time, make no pacts with Asmodeus, because you only strengthen his already limitless power, and happy monster hunting.